My 5-year-old daughter, Gracie, was lying in a white casket, surrounded by teddy bears and flowers, when my sister Diane leaned into the microphone and said the words that would destroy our family forever. The funeral home was packed with people who claimed to love my little girl. They sat in neat rows, dressed in black, holding tissues and programs with Gracie's smiling face on the cover. That picture was from her 5th birthday party just 2 months ago. She was missing her front tooth and grinning at the camera, chocolate cake smeared across her cheek. I'm Hannah, and I was sitting in the front row trying to remember how to breathe. My son Connor, 8 years old and too young to understand why his sister wouldn't wake up, pressed against my side. His small hand gripped mine so tight I could feel his pulse racing through his fingers. Behind us sat my parents, Eleanor and Robert. My mother had already made 3 comments about my appearance that morning. "Hannah, couldn't you have done something with your hair? People are watching us." As if my hair mattered when my baby was dead. Diane stood at the podium like she belonged there. My older sister, always perfect, always in control. Her house never had toys on the floor. Her children never talked back. Her husband never left her for a younger woman. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed they were completely dry. Maybe God took her because he saw what kind of mother she had, Diane said, her voice carrying through the silent room. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt Connor stiffen beside me. Around us, people actually nodded. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, Diane's book club friends. The other mothers from Gracie's preschool who always whispered when I showed up in my hospital scrubs, exhausted from a night shift. My mother, Eleanor, stood up without invitation, moving to stand beside Diane. Some children are better off in heaven than in broken homes. We all tried to help, but Hannah was too proud to accept that she couldn't handle motherhood alone. The room spun. My daughter was dead, lying in a casket decorated with the butterflies she loved, and they were using her funeral to put me on trial. Every failure they'd ever imagined about me was being displayed for everyone to judge. The time I was late picking Gracie up from dance class because of a trauma patient, the store-bought cupcakes I'd brought to the school bake sale, the mismatched socks she sometimes wore because laundry was the last thing on my mind after a 12-hour shift. I wanted to stand up and scream at them. I wanted to tell them about the songs Gracie and I made up during car rides, the way she'd curl into my lap after nightmares, how she'd say, "Mommy, you smell like safety." The butterfly garden we'd planted together, spending a whole Saturday covered in dirt and laughing. The books we read every single night, no matter how tired I was. The way she'd trace the letters of her name that I'd taught her to write, so proud when she got them all in the right order. But my voice was frozen in my throat. Grief and rage battled inside me, and I couldn't make a sound. Connor's hand tightened in mine. I felt him trembling, thought he was crying. But when I looked down at him, his face wasn't sad. It was angry. His jaw was set, the same way it got when older kids picked on him at school. He was staring at Diane with an expression I'd never seen on my gentle boy's face. Then suddenly, without warning, Connor stood up. His voice cut through the funeral home like a blade. Should I tell everyone what Aunt Diane put in Gracie's juice box? The silence that followed was complete. You could have heard a pin drop. Every single person in that funeral home turned to stare at my 8-year-old son. Diane's face went from composed to panicked in less than a second. The tissue fell from her hand. "Connor, sweetheart, you're confused. You're grieving. Sit down, honey." But Connor didn't sit down. He stood there in his too big suit, the one we'd bought just 3 days ago because who keeps funeral clothes for an 8-year-old? He looked so small but so fierce, like David facing Goliath. "I'm not confused," Connor said. "I saw you. You told me it was vitamins, but Gracie said vitamins don't make juice fizzy. She told me they made her feel funny." My mother tried to intervene. "Hannah, control your son. This is inappropriate." But something had broken free inside me. My baby was dead, and my son was trying to tell us something important. "Let him speak," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Connor looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes now, but also determination. "Mom, I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Tell me what, baby?" "What Aunt Diane was putting in Gracie's juice. The white pills she crushed up when she thought no one was looking. The medicine, she said, would help Gracie be a good girl. The funeral home erupted. People gasped, stood up, started talking all at once. But I only had eyes for Diane, whose perfectly composed face had finally cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. My daughter was dead. My sister had drugged her. And my 8-year-old son was the only one brave enough to speak the truth in a room full of adults who'd rather blame me than face the real monster among us. The morning of Gracie's funeral started like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the black dress I'd never wanted to wear. It was 6 a.m., and the house felt wrong without the sound of Gracie's feet running down the hallway, without her voice calling out, "Mommy, can I have pancakes?" She always wanted pancakes on Saturdays, and today was Saturday. Connor sat on my bed holding Gracie's favorite stuffed elephant. She'd named it Mr. Peanuts because she said his trunk looked like a peanut shell. Connor hadn't let go of it since we'd come home from the hospital 3 days ago. "Mom, do I have to say goodbye to her today?" he asked, his voice small and broken. I sat beside him and pulled him close. "We both do, baby, but she'll always be with us right here." I placed my hand over his heart, feeling it beat against my palm. "Aunt Diane says Gracie is happy now," Connor said, but something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. "She says Gracie is better off. What do you think?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "I think Gracie was already happy. She liked our house. She liked our family, even if we don't have a pool like Aunt Diane." The relationship with my sister had always been complicated. Diane was 4 years older, and she'd done everything right according to our parents' playbook. She married Paul straight out of college, a law degree from Harvard already lined up for him. They bought a house in the suburbs with a 3-car garage and a pool. They had 2 children spaced exactly 3 years apart, both in private school, both taking violin lessons and speaking beginner's Mandarin. I'd taken a different path. Nursing school while working nights at a diner, married my high school sweetheart Tommy, who turned out to love his secretary more than his family, divorced at 29 with 2 kids and a mountain of debt. But I'd fought for my children. I'd worked double shifts to keep our small apartment, then saved enough for a down payment on a tiny 2-bedroom house with a backyard just big enough for Gracie's butterfly garden. Diane had been watching Gracie more often since the divorce, not because I'd asked, but because she'd insisted. "You're overwhelmed, Hannah," she'd said, showing up at my door with her perfect makeup and designer handbag. "Let me help. That's what family does." My mother, Eleanor, had backed her up, of course. "Diane has experience, Hannah. Her children are thriving. Maybe Gracie could benefit from spending time in a more structured environment." The criticisms were constant, but always wrapped in false concern. Eleanor would visit and reorganize my kitchen, clicking her tongue at the mismatched dishes we'd gotten from garage sales. "Children need consistency, Hannah. They need proper meals at proper times." This from a woman who'd fed us TV dinners 5 nights a week when I was growing up, but apparently grandmother amnesia had set in. My father, Robert, was quieter but no less judgmental. He'd slip $20 bills into Connor's pocket and whisper, "For when your mom forgets to pack lunch money." I never forgot lunch money. Not once. But the narrative had been established. Hannah the mess, Hannah the failure, Hannah who couldn't handle motherhood alone. The accident happened 3 days ago, on a Wednesday afternoon. Diane had picked up both kids from school. She often did on Wednesdays when I worked the day shift. Connor would do homework in her pristine living room while Gracie played with Diane's collection of educational toys. Everything in Diane's house was educational. Even the snacks came with flashcards. The call came at 3:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was checking my watch, thinking about my dinner break. Diane's voice was strange, too calm. "Hannah, there's been an incident. Gracie collapsed. We're at St. Mary's." By the time I reached the hospital, racing through red lights with my hazards on, my baby was gone. The doctors said severe allergic reaction, possibly complicated by respiratory depression. But Gracie had no allergies. I'd had her tested twice because of Tommy's family history of peanut allergies. Nothing. She could eat anything. Connor had been there when it happened. He'd been in Diane's basement playing video games, the only non-educational activities she allowed, because Paul had insisted boys needed some screen time. He'd heard the commotion, come upstairs to find Gracie on the kitchen floor, Diane screaming for Paul to call 911. Since then, Connor had been different, quieter. He'd stare at nothing for long stretches, then suddenly look at me like he wanted to say something. But when I'd ask, he'd just shake his head and hold Mr. Peanuts tighter. "Mom," Connor said now as I zipped up the back of my black dress, "Gracie didn't like going to Aunt Diane's house anymore." "What do you mean?" "She said the juice boxes tasted funny. She said they made her feel sleepy and her tummy hurt, but Aunt Diane said she had to drink them all. Every drop." The funeral home was packed with more people than I'd expected. Gracie's preschool class had come with their parents. My coworkers from the hospital filled 3 rows. Neighbors, distant relatives, even the mailman who always saved stickers for Gracie stood in the back. But sitting in the front rows were Diane's people, her book club, her Pilates friends, the other perfect mothers from her perfect neighborhood who looked at me like I was a cautionary tale. Diane had insisted on giving a eulogy, despite my protests. That morning, she'd cornered me in the funeral home's family room. "I knew Gracie better than anyone, Hannah. I spent more quality time with her than you did. You were always at work, always tired, always distracted. Let me do this. Let me honor her properly." I'd wanted to fight her, but my parents had appeared, flanking her like bodyguards. "Let Diane speak," Eleanor had said. "She's better at public speaking. You'll just break down and make everyone uncomfortable." So now Diane stood at the podium, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She adjusted the microphone with practiced ease. Behind her, Gracie's casket sat surrounded by flowers. The butterflies on the casket's handles seemed to mock us all. My baby had loved butterflies because she said they proved that changes could be beautiful. "Like when you changed from sad to happy, Mommy," she'd told me once after the divorce. "Gracie was a special child who needed special care," Diane began, her voice carrying that false sweetness she used when she was about to say something cruel. "She was energetic. Some might say hyperactive. She struggled with boundaries and structure. These aren't criticisms, merely observations from someone who loved her enough to see her clearly." My hands clenched in my lap. Connor pressed closer to me, and I could feel him trembling. "Some of us tried to fill the gaps," Diane continued, now looking directly at me. "We tried to give her the stability she craved, the proper nutrition she needed, the attention she deserved. I opened my home to her, gave her consistency, routine, the things children require to thrive." "She's lying," Connor whispered, so quiet only I could hear. "Gracie didn't like the routine. She said Aunt Diane had too many rules." Diane kept going. "We did our best to compensate for the chaos in her life. The irregular schedules, the processed foods, the lack of proper supervision. But sometimes, despite our best efforts to help, tragedy strikes. Perhaps God saw that some situations are simply too broken to fix." The room was completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. She was standing at my daughter's funeral, turning it into a performance about what a terrible mother I was. Then Eleanor stood up, uninvited, walking to stand beside Diane, my own mother joining the attack. "Diane is right. I watched Hannah struggle with motherhood from day one. She was overwhelmed when Connor was born, and it only got worse with Gracie. The night shifts at the hospital, feeding the children takeout, letting them stay up past bedtime watching movies instead of reading educational books." She turned to address the crowd like this was some kind of intervention. "We tried to help. We offered to pay for a nanny, but Hannah was too proud. We suggested Gracie might benefit from living with Diane during the school week, just until Hannah got her life together, but she refused. And now look where we are." Several people actually nodded. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who'd once called child services because Connor was playing in our yard unsupervised for 10 minutes while I ran inside to turn off the stove. Diane's book club friends, who'd never spoken to me directly, but whispered plenty when they thought I couldn't hear. Even my father looked away from me, his silence as damning as their words. "Maybe God took Gracie because he saw what kind of mother she had," Eleanor said, her voice breaking with fake emotion. "Some children are better off in heaven than in broken homes. At least now she's at peace." The room felt like it was spinning. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to tell them about all the nights I'd sat up with Gracie when she had nightmares, singing the special song we'd made up about brave butterflies. The Saturday mornings we'd spend making pancake shapes, even though Diane said pancakes were nothing but sugar and carbs. The way Gracie would help me with my nursing flashcards, pretending she could read the big medical words, making up silly definitions that made us both laugh until our stomachs hurt. I wanted to tell them that Gracie didn't need their perfect structure. She needed love, and she had it. She had so much love. But my voice was frozen. The grief was crushing me, and their words were adding weight I couldn't bear. Then I felt Connor's hand tighten in mine. He was shaking harder now, but when I looked down, I realized it wasn't from sadness. His face was red, his jaw clenched. He looked exactly like he had the day he'd stood up to the 5th-grade bully who'd been picking on a younger kid. Without warning, Connor stood up, pulling his hand from mine. "Should I tell everyone what Aunt Diane put in Gracie's juice box?" Connor's voice rang out clear and steady through the funeral home. The silence that followed was absolute. Every head turned to stare at my 8-year-old son, standing there in his too big suit, his shoulders squared, facing down a room full of adults. Diane's face drained of color completely. The tissue in her hand fluttered to the floor. "Connor, sweetheart, sit down," she said quickly, her voice pitched too high. "You're confused, honey. You're grieving. Children don't always understand what they see." But Connor didn't sit. He took a step forward, closer to the aisle. "I'm not confused. I saw you. You said it was vitamins, but Gracie told me vitamins don't usually make drinks fizzy. She said they made her tongue feel funny." "The boy is obviously traumatized," Eleanor interjected, moving toward Connor. "Hannah, control your son. This is neither the time nor the place for a child's wild imagination." Something snapped inside me. They'd spent the last 20 minutes destroying me at my daughter's funeral, and now they wanted to silence my son. I stood up, putting my hand on Connor's shoulder. "Number, let him speak. Connor, tell us what you saw." Connor looked up at me, and I saw tears streaming down his face, but his voice stayed strong. Every time we went to Aunt Diane's house, she gave Gracie special juice boxes. Different from the ones her kids got, she kept them in a separate part of the fridge, behind the organic milk. Diane laughed, but it sounded forced and sharp. Those were vitamin-enriched drinks. Hannah never gave her proper supplements. I was ensuring she got the nutrients she needed. "Then why did you always make sure Gracie drank them in the kitchen while you watched?" Connor asked. "And why did you tell her she couldn't have snack until she finished every drop? And why did you hide the bottle when Uncle Paul came in?" Paul, Diane's husband, stood up from his seat in the second row. His face was confused, concerned. "What bottle?" "Diane, what is he talking about?" Connor turned to face the crowd. "Last Tuesday, when Mom had to work late, I finished my homework early. I went to the kitchen to ask for a snack. Aunt Diane was crushing pills, white pills from a prescription bottle. She mixed them into Gracie's juice box with a tiny funnel. When she saw me, she said they were vitamins and made me promise not to tell Mom because Mom wouldn't understand about proper nutrition." "That's enough," Diane shouted. "He's making things up. Children have wild imaginations when they're grieving." But Connor kept going. "Gracie didn't like those juice boxes. She told me they made her sleepy and her tummy hurt. Sometimes she could barely stay awake for dinner. Aunt Diane said she was just tired from playing, but Gracie hadn't been playing. She'd been sitting on the couch for hours, too dizzy to move." Dr. Morrison, Gracie's pediatrician, stood up from his seat in the 5th row. "Connor, this is very important. Did your aunt give Gracie anything else? Any other medicine?" Connor nodded. "Benadryl. She said it was for Gracie's sniffles, but Gracie didn't have sniffles. She gave it to her every time, right before the juice box." The doctor's face went pale. "What kind of pills were they?" "The white ones. Did you see the bottle?" The label said Xanax. I remember because it sounds like Xavier from X-Men. Gasps rippled through the funeral home. People were standing now, voices rising. Paul was staring at his wife in horror. "Your anxiety medication? You gave our niece your Xanax?" "Just tiny amounts." Diane's composure finally cracked completely. She was so hyperactive at my house, always running, always making noise, breaking things, making messes. She couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. I needed her to calm down. "You drugged my daughter?" I heard my own voice, but it didn't sound like me. It sounded like something primal, something dangerous. You drugged my 5-year-old baby because she was acting like a normal child? It was harmless, Diane insisted, backing away from the podium. Just enough to keep her manageable. Other mothers do it all the time. Ask anyone with an ADH kid. Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. Xanax and Benadryl together can cause severe respiratory depression in children. Fatal respiratory depression. The combination would have slowed her breathing to dangerous levels. Connor spoke again, his small voice somehow carrying over the noise. The day Gracie died, Aunt Diane gave her 2 juice boxes. She said one wasn't working fast enough. She was angry because Gracie had knocked over a lamp while dancing. She said Gracie needed to learn consequences. My father Robert suddenly stood up, his face darker than I'd ever seen it. "Diane, what have you done?" "I was helping," Diane screamed. "Hannah couldn't handle her. The child was wild, undisciplined. Someone had to step in. Someone had to save her from that chaos." "Save her?" I moved toward my sister, and several people stepped between us. "You killed her. You killed my baby because she danced in your perfect house." Someone in the back was already on the phone with 911. I could hear them giving the funeral home's address, saying something about a confession to child endangerment, possible homicide. The funeral home erupted into complete chaos. People were standing, shouting, some calling 911, others recording on their phones. 2 off-duty police officers who'd come to pay their respects moved to block the exits. Diane stood frozen at the podium, her perfect composure finally shattered completely. "I need everyone to remain calm and stay where you are," Officer Janet Mills announced. She'd worked with me at the hospital during several emergency calls. "Police are on their way. Nobody leaves until they arrive." Dr. Morrison had pushed his way to the front, his face grave. "Mrs. Campbell," he addressed Diane formally, "I need to know exactly what you gave Gracie, the exact dosages. This is now a medical investigation." "I want a lawyer," Diane said, her voice shaking. "I'm not saying anything without a lawyer." "You just confessed in front of 200 witnesses," Paul said, his voice hollow with shock. "My God, Diane, our children. Have you been drugging our children too?" Diane turned on him. "Our children don't need it. They're well behaved. They know how to sit still, how to be quiet when adults are talking. Gracie was different. She was uncontrollable." "She was 5 years old," I screamed. And this time, no one held me back. She was a perfectly normal 5-year-old girl who liked to dance and sing and play. That's what children do. Connor tugged on my dress. "Mom, there's more." His voice was quiet but determined. I took pictures. The room went silent again. Even Diane stopped trying to defend herself. "What pictures, baby?" I knelt down to his level. He pulled out his phone, the old one I'd given him for emergencies. After I saw Aunt Diane with the pills, I felt weird about it. So the next time we went over, I took pictures of the bottles when she went to the bathroom, and I took a video of her putting the pills in Gracie's juice. Officer Mills gently took the phone from Connor. As she scrolled through, her expression grew increasingly grim. "Connor, you're a very brave and smart young man. These are dated from 2 weeks ago. This has been going on for a while." 3 months, Connor said. "It started 3 months ago. That's when Gracie began saying she didn't want to go to Aunt Diane's house. She said the juice boxes were yucky and made her feel sick." Eleanor collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "We didn't know, Robert, we didn't know." "But you supported her," I said, turning to my parents. "You stood at my daughter's funeral and blamed me while her killer gave the eulogy. You said she was better off dead than with me as her mother." "We thought we were helping," Robert said, his voice broken. "We thought Diane knew best. She always seemed to have everything together." "Everything together?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She murdered my child because Gracie knocked over a lamp, because she danced, because she laughed too loud, because she was alive." The police arrived then, 6 officers entering the funeral home. The lead detective, a woman named Sarah Chen, took charge immediately. "I need everyone who witnessed the confession to remain. We'll be taking statements." As they read Diane her rights, she kept repeating, "I was trying to help. She needed discipline. Hannah couldn't handle her. I was saving her." "Saving her from what?" Detective Chen asked. "From being a child?" "From becoming like Hannah, Diane spat. Divorced, struggling, working all hours, barely keeping it together. I was giving Gracie a chance at a better life. No, Connor said, his young voice cutting through everything. You were killing her slowly because she reminded you that life isn't perfect. Gracie was happy. She loved Mom. She loved our little house. She loved our family exactly how it was. He walked over to Gracie's casket, placing Mr. Peanuts inside with her. She used to tell me that Aunt Diane's house felt like a museum where you couldn't touch anything. She said our house felt like home. She said Mom's hugs were better than all of Aunt Diane's fancy toys. Paul approached me as the police led Diane away in handcuffs. Hannah, I swear I didn't know. If I had even suspected something like this was happening under my roof, I would have stopped it immediately. I believed him. Paul had always been kind but oblivious, too buried in his work to see what his wife was becoming. Your children, Paul. You need to check if she was medicating them too. His face went white. Oh God, they've been so quiet lately, so compliant. I thought they were just growing up. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. Bring them to the hospital immediately. We need to run toxicology screens. As the funeral home slowly emptied, only family and investigators remaining, I stood by Gracie's casket. The funeral was ruined, but somehow that felt appropriate. Gracie wouldn't have wanted a formal, quiet ceremony anyway. She would have wanted truth, even if it came with chaos. Connor stood beside me. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared Aunt Diane would say I was lying. She always said you wouldn't believe me because you were too stressed to think clearly. I pulled him close. You saved other children today, Connor. You were braver than all the adults in this room. Gracie would be so proud of you. 6 months later, Connor and I stood in Gracie's butterfly garden. The monarchs were migrating through, filling our small backyard with orange and black wings. We'd expanded the garden after the funeral, and neighbors had donated plants and butterfly houses. It had become a neighborhood project, with children coming by to help water and watch the caterpillars transform. Diane was serving 15 years for involuntary manslaughter. The investigation revealed she'd been medicating Gracie for 3 months, gradually increasing the doses. They found a journal where she'd documented Gracie's behavioral improvements after each drugging. She'd written things like, much calmer today after double dose, and finally sat through entire dinner without fidgeting. The prosecutors said it showed premeditation, that she knew exactly what she was doing. Paul had divorced her immediately and moved his children out of state to live with his parents. The toxicology reports showed both kids had traces of Xanax in their systems too. They were in therapy now, learning how to be children again, learning that it was okay to laugh loudly and make messes. Mom, Connor said, watching a monarch land on the purple coneflowers Gracie had picked out last spring. Do you think Gracie knows I saved other kids? I think she knows you're the best big brother anyone could ask for, I said, pulling him close. My parents had tried to reconcile, sending letters, cards, flowers every week. Eleanor wrote long apologies about how blind she'd been, how sorry she was for the things she'd said at the funeral. Last week, she'd sent a check for $50,000 with a note that said, "For Connor's college fund." I failed Gracie. I won't fail him. I hadn't cashed it yet. Maybe I would someday for Connor's sake. But forgiveness was harder than forgiveness. Every time I considered it, I remembered Eleanor standing at that podium, saying my daughter was better off dead than with me as a mother. Robert had visited once, alone. He'd stood in our doorway looking older than I'd ever seen him. I should have protected you both, he'd said. A father should protect his children, all his children. I failed you, and I failed Gracie. I'd let him see Connor for an hour, small steps. The truth about Gracie's death had spread through our community like wildfire. The mothers who'd judged me, who'd whispered about my parenting, now approached me with guilty apologies. Mrs. Patterson had broken down crying in the grocery store, begging my forgiveness for calling child services that time. I told her I forgave her, but I still switched grocery stores. My coworkers at the hospital had rallied around us. They'd created a fund for Connor's therapy and covered all my shifts during the trial. Dr. Morrison had testified as an expert witness, explaining how the combination of medications had slowly poisoned my baby. He'd cried on the stand, apologizing for not catching the symptoms during Gracie's last checkup. Nobody could have known, I'd told him later. She presented as a sleepy child. Diane made sure of that. Connor had become something of a hero at school. The boy who'd stood up to adults, who'd saved other children from a dangerous person. But he didn't want the attention. He just wanted his sister back. "Mom," he said now, as we sat on the bench we'd installed by the garden, "I've been thinking about what Gracie would say about all this." "What do you think she'd say?" "I think she'd be mad that Aunt Diane tried to change her. She liked being loud and silly, remember? When she said she wanted to be a butterfly tornado when she grew up?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "She said she'd spin around so fast she'd create a storm of butterflies wherever she went." "She kind of did," Connor said, gesturing at the garden full of butterflies, "just differently than she planned." We sat there quietly, watching the monarchs dance in the afternoon sun. The truth had been ugly and painful, but it had also freed us. Gracie's death wasn't my failure as a mother. It wasn't because I worked too much, or bought store-bought cupcakes, or let her wear mismatched socks. It was because someone who claimed to love her had loved control more. A little girl from down the street ran into the yard chasing a butterfly. Her mother started to call her back, then stopped, letting her child be joyful and free. That was Gracie's real legacy. Every parent in our neighborhood now let their children be a little louder, a little messier, a little more alive. "Mom," Connor said, taking my hand, "you were the best mom for Gracie. You let her be herself. That's what she loved most." And for the first time since that horrible day, I truly believed it. Gracie had been perfectly imperfect, wonderfully wild, beautifully herself, and I'd loved her exactly as she was. That was the truth that mattered, the only truth that would last. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart or reminded you to cherish the wild, wonderful children in your life, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about how you let children be children, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories that need to be told. Remember, sometimes the most perfect thing about a child is their beautiful imperfection.